everybody can hear me. So I'm Chaitra Gururaja. I'm the director of the Indian Music Ensemble at Auburn University. Today I'm going to talk about the impact that music has had on the society from medieval times to today's time, and with a particular reference to Indian music. Let's trace this effect from earlier times. Whenever there's been repression in the society, we've seen the arts taking a beating. Whenever there's been a golden era, we've seen the arts flourishing. So it's safe to say that the arts are a mirror of the social times that we see. In India, the art form of classical music or Indian music has evolved from its medieval custodians called Devadasis, who had to be sex workers. And today's time, we see that this music is being embraced by people from all walks of society, and it's crossed over borders to become a type of music with international repute. In the medieval times, different genres reflected the tastes of different sections of society. For example, classical music brought out the nuances of taste in royalty and in aristocratic circles. But folk music was more in touch with the issues of the common man, and it was also a means of passing on information from one generation to the other. Over time, these different genres, which are actually like watertight compartments, have experienced a kind of osmosis to kind of leak out their information, to intermingle, and it has brought about a lot of socio-cultural change. Globalization is definitely a very important factor in bringing about this change. We look at the genres one by one and see how they have individually affected the society. Classical music, one of the oldest forms, is very rigid in terms of structure and deals with metaphysical elements in terms of the lyrics. Light music is light because the rules are not so strict, the rules are lighter, deals with poetry and issues that are close to the common man. Indie pop was popularized in the 1980s. Folk, again, is very old and very diverse in a country like India. Pandavani, Baul, Janapada are some of the examples. Film music is a huge part of the industry, makes a major economic impact, and is responsible for 80% of the revenue in the entire music industry. So if we have to understand the impact of that music, we need to know a little bit about what that music is about. In classical music, the two key terms are raga and tala. Raga is a melodic structure which mimics some of the effects in nature. So we have morning ragas, evening ragas. It also mimics the mood of the human mind. So we have happy ragas, sad ragas. And the next important aspect is tala, which is the rhythm or a cycle of beats, which goes in a sequence. Each beat on the drum, Indian drum, which is called as tabla, has a name. So I want to play a short example of how that would be. I just played this to show you how structured classical music is, and in India, in a typical concert, once the tabla starts, about 80% of the audience is able to pick up on the tal and beat, and they'll be showing the tal with their hands with perfect unison. So it shows you that classical music is kind of targeted towards an audience that is educated, that has a bit of inclination towards this, that has a background about what is going on. And classical music, we are looking at a picture here. There are two ladies who are singing. They're sisters. They're one of the most famous artists in today's time. They're Ranjini and Gayatri. There's a drum called Mridangam, and the violin has been adapted into Indian music, so much so that it's a must-have. And at the back we see a tamburi. So what's special about this picture is that it not only just shows a typical recital. This picture actually represents the triumph of democracy. Because in olden times, if a woman had to be a performer, she had to be a sex worker. Only Devadasis were performing on stage. And as the whole royalty setup kind of went, the system also got abolished. And with the establishment of democracy, we also saw that this music was open to the entire society. Devadasis were highly respected because of their art, and they were respected as artists. So they passed on the traditions to their students, and it's now available to everybody. Classical music has stepped across borders, and here we see Grammy Award-winning Indian artist Ravi Shankar with the iconic instrument sitar, along with the Beatles. There's another form of music called light music, light in terms of rules, and this dealt mainly with the poetry aspect. And contemporary poetry got a lot of prominence in this field, and a lot of reformers took to this field to bring about social changes. They stressed on things like education for everyone. They stressed on having dignity of labor across the society. It even played a very important role in the freedom struggle when India was fighting the British to gain independence. Then we have Lok Sangeet or folk music. India is very diverse because each state has its own language, its own differences in terms of customs, food, the way people dress, and this diversity is reflected in music, especially in folk music, because folk music is very regional and it brings out the flavor of that region. And we see literally every village having an instrument of its own, an art form of its own. And here we can see many different forms. There's Dollu Kunita and different instruments. And on the right we see a lady dancing. She is Parvati Das Baul, and she is a trailblazer because she brought this form of folk music called Baul Sangeet, where she's dancing at the same time, playing on the drum and playing an instrument and singing at the same time. And this was not considered elitist, but she was able to bring it into mainstream music, and now she performs across the world. She's a regular visiting performer and resource person at Berkeley, and she's been awarded the highest artistic award in India. At current times, there's indie pop. There was a time where TV meant having one channel. Switching it on and off is all you can do with the remote. And at this time, there was an educational hour, there was a news hour, everything was squeezed into one channel. And then came MTV, Channel V in the 1980s. And with that came a huge influx of Western instruments into the Indian music scene. So we can see guitars and drums taking up the center stage, and a kind of cultural shift in terms of the music. And after about 2 decades, it kind of took a back step because it could not keep up with the film music in India. The film music, why it is so, it takes up such a chunk of people's time and attention is because it has the maximum amount of economic impact. And can anybody guess how many movies are made in India per year? 2,000 movies were made in 2018. Just in that 1 year, there were 2,000 movies, and 90% of them are musicals. So you can imagine the amount of music that's being generated in this industry. And here, there are no rules. Whatever sells is whatever they're going to make. But it's a good indicator of the mood of the nation. And we can see that this is an example of how music has crossed over. In the center, we see Pandit Vishwamohan Bhatt holding an instrument that looks like a guitar, but it's actually a modified guitar which is made to sound like the sitar, like the Indian sitar, and he's collaborating with artists from all over the world. And this album was a huge hit, which also shows that this dialogue is not only opened up, but is also gaining in popularity. In our own backyard in Auburn University, we have the Indian Music Ensemble with members from the community and students from the university who represent different countries. We have different instruments, and we can see that here people are comfortable embracing the costumes of the country, the instruments of the country, and we've had some very good friendships. We've attended each other's weddings, and the birthdays are celebrated in at least 4 or 5 different types in 4 or 5 languages. So this, to me, it kind of represents what this socio-cultural change has brought about. With evolving times and with an opening up of dialogue, with people communicating with each other through a medium like music, which kind of puts people in a place to interact more freely because it's such a universal language, we can see a positive socio-cultural change in the world today. On this note, I'd like to end my speech today. Thank you.
Thank you.